Hello YouTube. So, Hoyo has officially revealed the stats and effects for the new weapons coming in patch 4.0. There's a new 5-star weapon, a new fishing weapon, new battle pass weapons, and new forgeable weapons. So, there is quite a lot. Today, I will be looking at these weapons and giving my theory crafting analysis on them. I will only have the weapons calced on a few characters to give examples and a general idea, so don't think that they are only good on the characters that I calculated. I just can't calculate them on literally everyone because we would have a 24-hour video on our hands if I did. So with that said, let's just jump right into this. Alright, since there are so many weapons to cover, I'm going to make this easier on myself by covering each weapon of this same type at the same time. Starting with the bows, there are 3 of them. The 5-star bow, the first grade magic, is basically a crit damage weapon that gives charged attack damage bonus and attack percent based on how many characters on your team have the same element as the wielder. The battle pass bow, Scion of the Blazing Sun, is another charged attack based weapon. It essentially gives you increased charged attack damage bonus, but it seems to only apply to one target. It and all the other BP weapons are also crit rate weapons. Then there's the forgeable Song of Stillness. Pretty simple weapon. If you get healed, you gain 16% more damage bonus. Based on most existing weapons, we can assume that the passive for this and every other weapon we will cover has its effect doubled from R1 to R5, so that would be 32% if it was R5. Now that we have an idea of what these bows do, let's take a look at the math. The characters that I chose to use for these calculations are Ganyu, Tighnari, and Fischl. Ganyu and Tighnari because they are the only charged shot DPS for the 5-star and BP weapon, and Fischl is just another example to add some variety in there. For Ganyu, the calc is using her on a melt team of Ganyu, Zhongli, Bennett, Zhongling, so the first grade magic, TFGM for short, only has 1 stack of its passive. Despite that, it seems to still be her best weapon. I'm not actually too surprised by that. Even with only 1 stack, it's providing 66% crit damage, 16% charged attack damage bonus, and 14% attack, so it's a pretty big stat stick for her. It's not a massive upgrade over options like Hunter's Path and Aqua, but it does still come out superior. If you are using her in a team with more than 1 cryo, like say a freeze or mono cryo team where she is still using her charged shots, then it would be even better. As for the 4 stars on her, Song of Stillness is scuffed because you don't have a reliable way to get healed for it. Bennett is on the team, but he only heals if you are below 70% HP, which should be a very rare occurrence with Zhongli on the team. Still, I calculated it at R5 anyway, assuming you have the passive up, just to still see how it would compare. It's not super impressive, being roughly equivalent to Hamayumi, which is way easier to use. And the BP weapon at R1 is not great either, also being slightly behind Hamayumi. At R5, however, it gets significantly better and competes with 5-star weapons on her. However, the warding of the passive sounds like you only get the damage bonus on 1 target, and considering Ganyu has good AoE, that's a pretty big downside for her. As for Tighnari, Hunter's Path is still his best weapon by a pretty big margin. TFGM is behind it if you have 2 stacks, but if you only have 1 stack, then it's barely better than Slingshot. Scion is also barely better at R5, and behind it if you only have 1 stack. Song of Stillness, you could reliably get its passive on Tighnari if using someone like Baizu, Kuki, or Yao Yao with him, but even with its passive up, it's behind Slingshot. And as for Fischl, she doesn't use charge shots, so I didn't calculate the BP weapon on her, but TFGM at 2 stacks seems to be her second best weapon, only slightly behind a 2-stack Polar Star. Getting 2 stacks on TFGM should be pretty common for her, since her best teams already have double Electro anyway. If you only have 1 stack, then it's not quite as impressive, slightly behind Harp. Still a good weapon for her, just not as impressive as 2 stacks. And then Song of Stillness, you can get its passive up if you're using someone like Baizu or Yao Yao, but once again it just falls behind other options. However, it is not too far behind an R5 Stringless or Alley Hunter, so if you can reliably get its passive up and don't have a 5-star weapon or find Stringless or Alley yet, This should be a good weapon to use until then. Also, I almost completely overlooked this and had to go back and edit this into the video, but Venti and Wanderer Triple Anemo will have all 3 stacks of TFGM. Venti is used on crit build in this team, so it is absolutely worth checking the math for this. And in this team, the math shows that TFGM is Venti's weapon by a pretty good margin, being 8% above the second best option, 2-stack Polestar, and a massive 21% ahead of an R5 Stringless. And because why not, I calculated R5 Song of Stillness on him as well. It's about equal to R5 Stringless, but you aren't going to consistently have its passive up because of the healing requirement. And that covers the bows, so let's move on to the swords. The first one is the fishing weapon, which I shall call Ferryman for short. This is basically just an ER stick that gives some skill crit rate percent. The battle pass weapon, Wolf Fang, provides skill and burst damage bonus, and can ramp up your skill and burst crit rate each time they hit. Then the Forge Bow provides an attack percent buff and a flat attack buff, which should be 24% and 300 at R5. It's based off what's called a Bond of Life. With how Hoyo explains this, it sounds like the bond will absorb healing effects instead of your character, and once it's absorbed as much as it can, it will be cleared and you'll get the buff. Select the Forgeable Bow. This is another one that may be hard to use due to the healing requirement. For the swords, the main character I decided to calculate them with is Xingqiu. This is mainly because he's the only character I could think of that could ever get good use out of the fishing weapon. Now, I don't know if Wolf Fang stacks off-build or not. Its passive doesn't mention it working off-build, so for these calcs, I assumed it doesn't, but I also included full stack calcs just in case it does. These calcs also have Xingqiu on an ER stance, but an attack percent with Favonius and Ferryman. He has 45 total range swords, and the non-full stack Wolf Fang calcs have him on 2 stacks, but 0 stacks on 8 of the 45 range swords due to uptime. The calcs for Finale of the Deep also assume you have its full passive up, but again, like the bow, that may not be possible in a lot of teams due to the healing requirement. Wolf Fang, if fully stacked at R5, will easily be his highest damage 4-star weapon, but if you can't fully stack it, then Finale of the Deep, if you can get its passive, takes that spot instead. And even without being fully stacked, an all-1 Wolf Fang seems to be a bit better than Harbinger of Dawn, without the HP restriction. As for Ferryman, I really don't like this. If you need an ER stick on Xingqiu, it does give more damage than Favonius, but the 32% ER buff it gives only lasts 5 seconds, so you could find yourself running into awkward situations trying to build around that. I'd much rather do a bit less damage but have Favonius for way more reliable energy and providing the particles to improve the entire team's energy. Then the other character that I have calcs to show for is Alhaitham with Wolf's Fang. I don't have much Hytham math of my own because he's a character that I hate calculating, so this calc comes from my friend Prars. Based on this, we can see that Wolf Fang at R5 is equivalent to and even superior to some 5-star weapons on Hytham, only slightly behind his signature, which is pretty insane. But those are the only 2 characters I have math to show for with these swords. I didn't feel like it was needed to do it on a bunch of characters, since they should compare pretty similarly on any character that can use them well. So for Wolf Fang, characters like Kaya, Crit Kazuha, and Kaching are examples of other characters that should make great use of it. And for Finale of the Deep, Zubin provides a pretty crazy amount of attack, so basically any attack scaling sword user in a team where they can reliably get the passive should make excellent use out of this. And that's not even just as a F2P or new player friendly option. It looks like it's going to be beating out most if not all other 4-star options for a lot of characters. And as for Ferryman, the fishing weapon, I think it's just a bad weapon. Just use Favonius. Moving on, there's 2 polearms to talk about. The BP weapon, Ballad, gives an EM buff of 120 at R1 as long as you have at least 3 different elements on your party. At R5, this should be 240, which is pretty massive. Then the Forgeable, Rightful Reward, is a support weapon. It gives 27.6 HP from the main stat, and restores 8 energy, which should be 16 at R5 if you are healed, with a 10-second cooldown. Let's talk about the Forgeable first. Since this is just an energy stick for supports, there's not much math to go over. The healing requirement will make it pretty hard to use in a lot of scenarios. Yao Yao should be able to make great use of it since she provides her own healing. Doma theoretically should be able to use this weapon well since he wants both HP and energy. However, the healing requirement really holds it back on him. I can't think of any team where he would reliably get it other than like a Bargain team with Baizu, but you would rather use Kitane for the EM there. Then the other character I think it should be good on is Yunjin, if using her and Micah together in a Wanderer team. Micah heals the entire team with his burst to allow Yunjin to reliably get this. You can also use this weapon on Micah himself. I don't want to leave you guys without any calcs for this weapon, so I will show you some quick energy calcs. In the team of Wanderer, Micah, Yunjin, Farazan, Yunjin should need about 194% ER to burst every rotation if using Favonius. That's very easy to achieve on Favonius, since she ascends with ER, and it's an ER weapon, but it comes at the expense of needing to crit, which can force you to run a crit rate circlet on her, and sometimes need to extend her field time to proc it. But with Rightful Reward, however, you should only need about 176% ER on Yunjin, which is again really low since she already ascends with ER. But you should be able to do even better and get Rightful Rewards passive on Yunjin twice per burst instead of once. The way you would do that is by, in one rotation, use Micah's burst after Yunjin, then in the following, do it before. If you can consistently do that, you won't need to build any ER on Yunjin at all. But even if you can't, 176 is very low and would still let you build her on 4-piece husk with triple defense with ease. So, this weapon gives more justification for using Micah over Bennett with Wanderer, which is very nice to see. And now, let's analyze the Battle Pass weapon. You want to use this on characters that benefit both from crit and EM. Immediately, Hu Tao, Sino, and Zhongling come to mind, so that's how I calculated this on. Starting with Hu Tao, I calculated her in a team of herself, Xingqiu, Yelan, and Zhongli, and assumed she is below 50% HP. Even at R1, it is slightly ahead of an R5 Dragon's Bane on her, and at R5 it is significantly ahead of Dragon's Bane, while being very slightly behind Staff of Homa. On Sino, I used the team of Sino, Nahida, Baizu, Xingqiu. Here, even at R1, it's beating out everything except Scarlet Sands, though the margin of difference between all those weapons is pretty small. But at R5, like on Hu Tao, it is only slightly behind his signature weapon, which is very impressive when you remember that Scarlet Sands basically gives Sino a Bennett buff just for existing. And then for Zhongling, I calculated it in Raiden National, just because that's the only reaction-based Zhongling team that I had calcs for that I could plug it into. At R1, it's beating out an R5 Catch by a good bit. However, in this team, Zhongling doesn't really need the energy, so Catch would be a bit more competent in a different team. And at R5, Blad is quite significantly ahead of Catch, but a good bit behind a 2-stack Scarlet Sands. Moving on, let's talk about the claymores. The Battle Pass weapon, Talking Stick, seems a bit awkward. Its passive relies on you being affected by elements. Pyro gives you 16% attack, and Hydro, Cryo, Electro, and Dendro give you 12% damage bonus, so 32% and 24% at R5. This would be great if you could reliably get both, but most teams are only going to reliably get the Pyro from Bennett's self-application. The Fudgeable, Tidal Shadow, is yet another weapon restricted by needing healing. If you do get its passive up, then at R5 it should be providing you with a 48% attack buff, while already having a 41.3% attack as its main stat. So it's a pretty big attack stick similar to the sword. For the calcs of these weapons, I chose to use the Luke and Eula. Eula because she can actually get Tidal Shadow reliably with Micah, and the Luke just have a secondary example. On a Eula, the team I calculated it with is Eula, Micah, Bennett, Raiden. Here, Tidal Shadow is beating out Luxurious Sea Lord and Akuo Maru R1 for Eula. So if you have Micah or any other way to reliably get healed every rotation, Tidal should be Eula's new best free-to-play / new player-friendly option, only slightly behind Akuo Maru even if it is R5. And then Talking Stick seems very not good. At R5, if you manage to have both of its passives up, then it's only slightly behind Song of Broken Pines, so having both passives up would rely on an enemy applying one of those elements to you, so it won't be consistent. And even with both passives up, it's only slightly ahead of Serpent Spine anyway, which is a much more consistent weapon. If you aren't getting both passives, then this weapon is just terrible. Even at R5, it will be worse than an R1 Spine. Then with Diluc, we have a very similar situation, where at R5 it is pretty close to his best 5-star weapon, but only slightly ahead of an R5 Spine, while Spine is way more consistent. Without its passive up, it's terrible and worse than R1 Spine even at R5. Then Tidal Shadow, we don't have a convenient way to make this consistent on Diluc, and even if we did, it is behind Mailed Flower just a bit. Lastly, let's look at the catalysts. The BP weapon, Sacrificial Jade, is very interesting. Its passive wants you to be off-field. They will provide 32% HP and 40 Elemental Mastery, or 64% and 80 at R5, while also having a 36.8% crit rate main stat. This is a pretty massive stat stick, but the problem is, no character in the game right now really cares for what it provides. The HP is being completely wasted on everyone. This makes me think that this is probably designed with future characters in mind, so we will have to wait and see for that. If we did get an off-field HP scaling catalyst user that also benefits from EM on them, this weapon would be incredible for that character. Then the Forgeable, Flowing Purity, is a Bond of Life weapon like the sword, but provides damage bonus instead. At R5, it should go up to 40%. There are only two characters that I decided warranted calculating these on, those being Nahida and Wanderer. For Nahida, I just calculated Sacrificial Jade and compared it to Wandering Evenstar. The 40 to 80 EM can help Nahida reach 1000 EM, and if you can reach 1000 EM with it, then it beats out Evenstar for her even at R1. However, it doesn't provide a team-wide buff like Evenstar. Depending on the team, you may also have a hard time reaching that 1000 EM benchmark as well if you aren't using an EM weapon. And with Wanderer, I calculated both weapons. This is with Wanderer buffed by Faruzan C6 and Bennett, but nothing coming from a 4th unit. Sacrificial Jade is very not good on him, since it's just a crit rate stick with low attack and a useless passive for him. The Craftable is better, but yet again it's unreliable due to needing you to get healed, and Bennett only heals if you are sub 70% HP. So you would need to be using Jean or Micah to make this consistent on him. And even then, it's worse than Widsith with its passive average to account for the RNG and downtime. It's not super far behind, about 1% if R1 and 7% if R5 Widsith. So if you are using Jean or Micah and you just don't want to put up with Widsith's RNG, or if you somehow don't have Widsith even at R1 yet, then this weapon is fine for Wanderer. But if you can't reliably get the Bond of Life, then it's terrible and should just not ever be used. But with that, we have covered all the weapons. Working on all these weapons took quite a bit of time, so if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please also be sure to comment below letting me know your thoughts. Thanks. Bye.